Jasad Heir is my adult debut fantasy novel that follows Sylvia, the heir of a scorched kingdom who strikes a traitor's bargain with her kingdom's worst enemy in an effort to save herself. I wanted to explore the journey of the main character, really. She was the first thing that came to my head of everything else in the story, and she is someone who is contrary, does not make the best of decisions, and most importantly, doesn't think that she's actually good enough to do what she needs to do. And so the message that I would really love readers to take away from the Jasad Heir is that it's not about the choices you made then, it's about the choices you make next, and what you have to offer is good enough. I was living in Egypt in 2009, and I left around 2 years later. And the reason we left was because the Arab Spring had occurred, and so the uprisings had shut down schools, and they had more or less brought regular life grinding to a halt. And so my family and we were there for about 7 months or 8 months after everything started, and then we had the ability and the privilege to be able to go somewhere safer, to come back to the US. But there was a sense of extreme guilt. For about a year and a half after I left, I couldn't think about anything other than it felt like I had jumped ship. And so I wanted to use some of my experiences in Egypt to write the perspective of Sylvia, the main character, who doesn't really know much about her home kingdom. She doesn't really know much about her people, and she grapples with, what do you owe to a place and a people that you barely know, but without whom you wouldn't exist? I've always thought of myself as a problem solver, and at the end of the day, that's what I think most attorneys are. They are problem solvers. I think that information is one of the key things that drives communities forward. And in my community especially, there are not a whole ton of lawyers. And I think it's really critical, because once people know that you are in law school, suddenly they have so many questions and these issues, because they want someone that they trust and someone that they know to help guide them in sometimes the worst situations of their lives. I now know how to facilitate the answering of that question. I can still help solve their problem in some fashion. And so pursuing my JD started with that root goal, which was to be a resource to my community. And so that was what I really loved, is that there are sometimes clear-cut answers, and there are other times where you really have to be creative and figure it out yourself. There's a character in it, the villain technically, who is very analytical and efficient. And the way he thinks, it is reflective of the way I would answer, say, a hypo. What's the rule statement? What's the issue? And then how am I solving it? I would push myself to the limit with each one. So I would study until the sight of, my laptop or my outline, I just couldn't stand it anymore. And then I'd move over to writing, which would now seem like the best thing in the world, because the comparison is that I'd have to do this. And then when I was stuck on a chapter or a scene and I just couldn't go any further with it, that's great, because now studying seems like the best thing to do. And so I'd push my limit to each one. And weirdly enough, it did help me get what I needed to get done. Publishing has gotten a lot better recently, but it has been traditionally not a very diverse industry. The voices that have been heard have not been marginalized voices. They haven't been voices that bring experiences from all parts of the world. There's never enough stories. The one I want to offer about Egypt, and that gets confused a lot, is folks think I mean ancient Egypt, because when people think Egypt, they usually think the pyramids and the pharaohs and all of that. But I mean Egypt as it is now. And that was something I was really committed to, is the Jasad Heir would have aspects of Egypt as I know it, as other Egyptians who grew up in America with the same background as me, who learned everything they know from their parents or from visits or from stories or from shows, would be able to recognize the same things in the books. There's just plenty of stories out there that are starting to carve their way into publishing, but they are not there in any capacity in as much as they need to be. So I think encouraging those voices and uplifting them is something that is really critical. There's plenty of need and plenty of room. Right now, the other project is the sequel to the Jasad Heir, but there are other things in the works that I'll hopefully be able to share more about later in the year.